Welcome to Conversations the World Over. I'm Raymond Arroyo. We're so happy to give you the chance to revisit some of my most powerful conversations over the last 19 years as host of The World Over. Tonight, I want to bring you one of my favorites. This is the celebrated Louisiana author, James Lee Burke. Now, Burke is the winner of 2 Edgar Awards, and this is very rare. That's sort of the mystery writer's Oscar. He continues to write at the top of his game, and he churns out a book a year, and they are spectacular. Success wasn't always a given, however. For 14 years, he suffered unceasing rejection, not to mention his inner battle with alcoholism. As I learned when I visited him at his home in New Iberia, Louisiana, the faith and history of this great American author allowed him to overcome major obstacles and create incredible works. Here's part 1 of my exclusive conversation with James Lee Burke. In the fiction of James Lee Burke, good, evil, the past, and the present coalesce here on the banks of Bayou Teche. In the little town his people have called home since the early 1800s, Burke has found a creative wellspring. 22 novels of history and crime, including the successful Dave Robichaux mystery series, were conceived here. Passing through the streets of New Iberia today, the impact of Burke's fiction is palpable. So is his attachment to this place.
The past is visibly present here. When I was a little boy, my daddy and I used to hunt for mini balls. It was the .58 caliber rounds that were used by both Federal and Confederate soldiers.
Remembrances abound.
My family lived right back here on the bayou, and at the foot of my aunt's property, there's 2 oaks still standing where there used to be mooring chains driven with big iron spikes into the trunk of the tree, and those were the mooring chains that were used by Jean Lafitte.
Wow. Then there was the uncle who represented an unsavory woman in court.
And she looked like the beast of Buchenwald. I mean, she was horrendous looking. Cakes of makeup, glass rings all over her fingers, a Frankenstein rouge, you know, and this big hat with plumes in it. And she's sitting there half drunk, you know, blowing body odor and booze all over the place. Uncle Portis goes over to the jury box with this somber expression on his face, and he says, "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this poor woman is someone's mother." He had them slobbering on their sleeves, right? He won the case, that's right. Oh, someone's mother!
So the Burkes have been spinning it for a long time.
We've been doing it a long time, brother.
And at 66, James Lee Burke is still doing it. Without an outline, he pounds out 1,000 words a day, spinning intricate plots and the poetic, gritty Catholic fiction that has made him famous. When did you first know, I can write? I'm a writer. This is what I'm supposed to do.
I started trying to write short stories when I was in the 5th grade. And later, my cousin Andre Dubusse and I became one another's pacing horse.
Really?
And Andre won first place in the Louisiana College Writing Contest in 1954. Mm-hmm. And I thought, he's not going to get away with that. And the following year, I entered the same contest. I won an honorable mention, but for me, that was a great accomplishment.
What was it, storytelling in the family? Did you hear stories in the family? Is it being in this neck of the woods in Louisiana?
Well, I don't know if it's a family tradition or not. There's several writers in the family. Of course, Andre,
right,
to my mind, is perhaps America's greatest short story writer. I think most literary writers would concede that.
I agree.
I think his work has received attention for the wrong reason, since, you know, he was hurt very badly in an accident.
He was helping a pedestrian, was hit and lost both his legs, right?
That's correct,
yeah.
And he never got out of the wheelchair.
Yeah.
There was no prosthesis possible.
Yeah.
And then he wrote many essays about his ordeal,
yeah,
and they're great essays, but they don't come close to his earlier work, the
right,
short stories.
Right.
Our ancestor, Uncle Willie, who's the main character in White Doves at Morning, was a writer, you see. So I don't know, maybe we get a little bit of it from Uncle Willie.
Tell me about your parents. Your mother was a secretary.
That's right.
Your father was a gas engineer?
Natural gas engineer, that's right.
What was the influence there? Did they have any influence over this pursuit of literature and writing?
My father always wanted to be a journalist and a historian, but he went to work on the pipeline in the 1920s, and then the Depression came along. And in 1930, if you had a job, you didn't change it off for something else. And he worked on the pipeline until his death in '55.
And you did everything. Not unlike, I mean, you really followed Dad's footsteps. You worked on a rig. You were a truck driver in Kentucky. You worked on Skid Row in Los Angeles. You were a professor.
Yeah.
I know I'm missing one or two here. What's the worst thing you did?
Well, I worked at some jobs that are of the kind people take when the Foreign Legion turns them down or they've been through electroshock.
My hunch is, reading your work, this was almost a laboratory for you to pick up the psychology of these different professions and the people that trafficked them.
Yeah.
Is that true?
I think the greatest learning experience I ever had was on Skid Row in LA and the south side of Los Angeles, where I both lived and was a social worker. That was the greatest learning experience.
In what way?
I learned about the reality of a city as opposed to its appearances. And I'm reminded of the title of the book, a famous book by Michael Harrington, The Other America. And in Los Angeles, the discrepancy between the haves and have-nots is probably most visible of any city. That one place glitters like Babylon, lit by neon on the shores of Santa Monica and the Palisades. The other, you go into the inner city of LA, is the worst of everything.
You are writing throughout this whole period.
Yeah.
How do you write in the middle of a war zone like that, when people are struggling for survival and you're seeing such tragedy and struggle around you all the time? Or did that animate your writing?
I learned a great deal during that period, but you're correct. It's hard to write if you have a job that is emotionally and intellectually demanding during your 8 hours on the clock. It's hard to go home and then do it again on your typewriter. And so I found the worst job I ever had for fiction writing was newspaper work. And the person I heard say that first was Nelson Algren many years ago. He came to visit the grad school I attended. But he said newspaper work not only drains you, it's fragmented. There's no sequence to it. And you just can't go home at night, as a rule, and write well, or write at all, if you've done it in a city room all day. The best job I ever had was working on the pipeline, because your mind's free during the day.
And then you published 2 novels, your first 2 novels, 34 years old, and you have 2 big Bafo critical successes.
Yeah.
And then what?
Well, I wrote my first published novel when I was only 23, Half of Paradise, and it took me 5 years to get it in print. I always wrote more easily than I published, but I got a 6-column banner review in the New York Times. Boy, it was a great review. It was my first review and the best one I have ever received, and I thought, that's pretty neat. Now, what else are they going to do for me? And then I published To the Bright and Shining Sun, and I wrote 2 other books in there that I never published. The third one didn't do as well. I Lay Down My Sword and Shield. But I hit the wrong Rubicon with The Lost Get Back Boogie. That was the 4th book, viable book. And I thought I would just publish it, but instead I went 14 years before I got back in hardback. And that book was rejected 111 times. And my agent, Philip Spitzer, whom I met when he was driving a cab in Hell's Kitchen, and running a one-man agency at night. Kept it under submission for 9 years.
Oh my God.
And we decided we'd just wear them down.
And you did.
That book was published by Louisiana State University Press, along with a collection of stories called The Convict.
The Convict, yeah.
And it put me back in business. So I really owe them a debt I have never been able to repay.
How do you endure a 14-year dry spell? How do you keep writing during that time? And what was your poor wife saying?
She was the one who kept after me to send a manuscript to LSU, and I didn't do it. I finally listened to my wife, and she was absolutely correct. And I never stopped writing, though. I cannot imagine not writing. I had to relearn during those 14 years an old lesson. You do it a day at a time. You do it to make the world a better place if you can. You never lose faith in your higher power. And I knew a Franciscan theologian, who was a close friend of mine, who told me something that I never forgot. And he said, you never keep track of the score. The score will take care of itself. And then he told me about a element of Catholic theology that I'd never heard. It's called the fundamental option. And he said, when you make the fundamental option, you choose good over evil in your life. And he said, after that point, you never measure your life or your career by any period of time, any set of events. He said, those things will winnow out and take care of themselves. He said, instead, you bear down on the batter, one pitch at a time, and towards the bottom of the ninth, you look over your shoulder, and you'll be pleasantly surprised at the mathematics on the scoreboard. Well, I never forgot those words, but this theologian, he was a Franciscan at a college in Kansas. Was quite a guy, but he was a baseball player.
I could tell, yeah.
As well as a priest, you see. Hemingway put it very well. If you believe them when they say you're good, you got to believe them when they say you're bad. And they told me I was bad for 14 years.
Well, now, during this 18-year span, you are pretty deep into the bottle. You're drinking pretty heavily.
Well, I used to drink. I belonged to a 12-step group today, and through that group I have 25 years, and
Wow.
So it's been a good life.
How bad did it get when it was really bad?
Well, it's like an excursion into another world. It's one that words don't adequately describe, and unless a person has lived in that terrain and entered it and exited it, he won't understand it. It's like using Sanskrit. It's not that anyone else should. But what occurs ultimately in people who have problems with booze or drugs or whatever it happens to be is that they reach a point, we believe, where they bottom out, and at that point it turns around for them. But as I said, I've been very fortunate. And of course, when I began writing the story of Dave Robichaux, which really has to do with Dave Robichaux's recovery, and I began planning what were 3 books that I thought would become a trilogy. It was my kind of attempt at Milton.
Right.
Paradise Lost, Paradise Regained. I never thought the books would be as successful as they were. I just started writing them.
I know your faith had something to do with your recovery. Talk to me a little about that, how it brought you back to the church.
All recovery programs, in one way or another, are based, at least to my knowledge, on faith in a higher power. And so for me, it was relearning that concept of a higher power. And so I sort of started all over again, in the program. But I also learned about many elements in the Catholic Church that are historical ones that, to my mind, define the Church much more so than perhaps some contemporary trends. if you read Eusebius, and I guess he is the most authoritative historian and was a contemporary of the people he writes about, describes a church that you see that one was much more simple in its organization, certainly, but its principles were based on the principles that have always given the church its social conscience, namely protection of the poor, and also the prohibition against the taking of any kind of life. In the early church, in the first 4 centuries, no Christian could participate in blood sports or even serve in the Roman army. If he served in the army, he had to request some kind of pacifist role, normally as an engineer, but the proscription about taking life had no room for negotiation, you see. But you see, we forget that the church, the early church, had those kinds of parameters. They weren't parameters, they were very strict boundaries. You did not take human life. It's that simple.
Would you say the faith helps you see this world clearer
I
than if you didn't have it?
Yeah, I think that the artist writing in a Catholic tradition or out of a Catholic tradition, making use of it, has an enormous advantage over his peers.
In what way?
Because of the historical sequence within the church and the access to Christian iconography. That all of Western symbolism is contained in the first 2,000 years of the church's history. You get to, in other words, use the material of Michelangelo and Botticelli and Leonardo, the writers like Chaucer, Boethius, Peter Anselm, Aquinas, Augustine. These guys weren't slouches.
Your cousin, Andre Dubuis, said, I am a Catholic writer. I always look for what's the ethical question here.
Yeah.
Would you join that chorus?
Sure. I might rephrase it. I'm a writer who happens to be Catholic. But I talked to my good friend, Father Jim Hogan at Christ the King, our parish in Montana. He said, I was very complimented. He said, I just finished your new book. You're the most Catholic writer I've ever read. You ooze with Catholicism. But more seriously, you see writers whose Catholic sensibility is obviously at work in their aesthetic. And I would say Ron Hansen is a very good example. And you see, Ron Hansen's probably one of the best writers in the English language. And it's like people are looking at Babe Ruth in the middle of Yankee Stadium and not seeing him. I mean, the guy's a titan.
I've had him on twice
before. Really?
And to have you and Hansen on this show is...
he's a fine fellow. Ron and I are very close friends, have been for many years.
It's fantastic.
But Graham Greene is another, you see. Graham Greene's troubled by what he saw in the colonial world. You see what's his the Quiet
American.
Quiet American. What a book! Wow.
Yeah.
You see, and you read guys like Dubuis and
O'Connor.
And Flannery O'Connor. She was a big influence on me. Flannery O'Connor is one of the great writers of the 20th century.
Why would you say that?
The way she was able to see the Garden of Gethsemane and Golgotha in the lives of these humble people in, Milledgeville?
Milledgeville, Georgia.
Yeah, and I think, you see, in Milledgeville there was both a penal work camp. Actually, these guys wore chains. And a mental institution. I'll bet you anything in the world, many of those characters and their stories
bounced out of those two
That's
places. Right. Let's talk for a moment about your work specifically. Would you say they're examinations of human suffering?
I think so. Yeah, I think it's, to me, the most troubling aspect of the human experience, and particularly of our times. It's just deeply troubling. I'm very bothered about the times in which we live and with the way we've become inured to suffering in the third world.
You feel that bothered nature in the work, particularly the latest, Jolie Blonde's Bounce. There is a sense there, and some critics have said, Dave Robichaux is more cynical and more angry than ever before. Do you feel that?
No.
Is James Lee Burke more cynical and angry than ever before.
No, I'm not cynical, but I think there's a difference between cynicism and looking at the world as it is. And I'll use Jesus' statement as the precedent. He said, if the world will reject me, what can you expect of it? You know, it's a pretty dark statement, but he's saying, in effect, do not look for the masses of people to accept his message.
I want to return to Dave Robichaux for a moment. He is your series hero, for those not familiar with his writing. He is a recovering alcoholic.
Yeah.
He is a Catholic.
Yeah.
He lives in New Iberia, and he has a daughter that shares your daughter's name.
That's right.
Where did this man come from?
Well, the character defects are all mine. I can claim those.
Is he a collage of people? Or is he basically drawn from you and then...
Well, I think the characters live in the unconscious, and I've never known exactly where they come from or where the story comes from. But I believe absolutely that the story is written in the unconscious, and it's written by a hand other than that of the artist. And Faulkner said before his death, had I not written these books, another would have written them for me. And you see, Emerson had the same belief about a great oversoul. And every artist who is honest, and most of them are when it comes to their talent, the real ones, they will be the first to state the talent they have, whatever degree of it they have, comes from someplace outside themselves. And those who claim that, in effect, they have manufactured their art out of the wellspring of their own experience, who become, in effect, arrogant and vain about their talent, are doomed to lose it. And it's taken from them and it's given to somebody else. But almost every artist will tell you that it comes from some place outside of himself. I think there's something truly mystical about art, that art is the one area in which we share in the province of God, that is creativity that takes us back into the source of all life.
Let me know what you thought of tonight's show and which of our interviews you'd like to see on an upcoming edition of Conversations the World Over. You can always write me at raymond@raymondarroyo.com. Tell me what you think. The new show premieres each Wednesday at 5:30 p.m. Eastern Time in the U.S. For those of you outside the U.S., go to EWTN.com for other air times. Next week, the conversations continue with the part 2 of my interview with James Lee Burke. On behalf of the staff and crew of EWTN News, I'm Raymond Arroyo. The conversations continue. Don't miss them. Bye now.